we had the privilege and the fortune of designing the 3D logo for Tata, which you see all over on all the trucks, buses, cars, vehicles, etc. We had 50 lakhs from the railways as a budget to create a railway station.
I think one of the few earlier projects that you got was to design that very unique visiting card of Ratan Tata.
We used to joke in our office that idea ka 10 rupiya. अभी थोड़ा भाव बढ़ गया है.
There's a lot of problem solving that must have happened at that time.
At the bus stop, you realize that the glare was too much, or the bus stop didn't offer any shelter, or the steel of the bus stops, which was made, got very hot, and you got your roasted backside.
Form, function, and future can be explored at all scales, SML Excel. And who better than architect Ratan Batliboi to explore and experience this with? So today we are going to talk about problem solving as a pertinent and important character of design thinking. Thank you so much for joining us today, architect.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For me, it's really one part of a trip down to memory lane because there's something that we share together, which is our alma mater, JJ College of Architecture. And maybe that is the first question that I want to ask you, that when it came, like for me, JJ has been this macrocosm that is open not just for the students, but for outsiders as well. And it's so public in its existence, although it is like a university right now in that is running. But and when I then look at all these public spaces that you have designed, they also have this very welcoming, inviting feature to it. So was JJ any kind of an inspiration to you or a start?
So I'm sure, Sonam, I mean, like every school or institution influences its students. I'm sure JJ had some influence on me, for sure. The issue is that I didn't spend too much time at JJ. I was doing many other things, earning a living. Education was not exactly a priority at those times. But I think the environment of JJ was very conducive to people and learning. Basically, just the arts, the creative spaces. We had workshops. We had all sorts of people coming in with jholas and kurtas, poets and singers and stuff like that. So I'm sure it had a great influence. But I think the more important thing is being able to sit around and observe what was happening at JJ. And I think those were the interesting things that happened to me.
So when at JJ, what are the other things that you said you never spent your time in the institute? So what did you do?
So I was, I did multiple jobs. I was working with my dad because he said, I should be in the family business, which is not architecture. It was paper. It was selling paper.
I thought Bartley boy hai, to kuch Bartley ka hoga.
Not really, but anyway. And then I used to do a lot of yachting, national level yachting. So I was constantly sailing. I kept bunking classes to go there. And then I used to, in the evenings, go to be a disc jockey, so to speak, for jam sessions and those kind of things, lagans and navjots and school socials and stuff. And then probably give tuitions. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that I was doing. I also did a lot of photography, which allowed me to travel a lot and take photographs of stuff. And I think the interesting thing was that all these things really fed into my sensitivity in terms of people and watching and, very focused and concentrated ways of constructive watching. So that the observation skills that were developed over those times, I think made a huge difference to my life.
I'm sure, because when you are observing out there in the public and the kind of spaces that you designed, there's a lot of problem solving that must have happened at that time as well, that would have led to solutions later.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, when you're sitting at a bus stop waiting for a bus, so when you're sitting, playing music at a festival with a playlist in those days, you had a lot of time to watch and observe people and observe different things about how people tripped over stuff, or how people at the bus stop, you realize that the glare was too much, or the bus stop didn't offer any shelter, or the steel of the bus stops, which was made, got very hot, and you got your roasted backside. So obviously there were observations like that which tended, you felt you had a solution, or you could think about solutions to these little problems. And I think that was really what helped in terms of what they today call design thinking, or little small things that you can refine to make things and life bigger and better.
You also delved into a lot of social work.
Well, delved into, as in we were brought up in a great school, St. Mary's, and we had social work was, I mean, it was a completely inclusive environment. So social work was sort of, we didn't know it was called social work. We just thought it was humanitarian, to read to the blind or offer food to the weak or the poor, or even, sit in and help poor kids learn their stuff. And I was coincidentally, a friend of ours in school had started CRY, Child Relief and You, at that time, in 1979. So I think that was a sort of easy slip into focused social work, social responsibility, I'd call it that. And I continue to be working with CRY. It's been 46 years now since it's started. And we were working on many other things way before CRY actually started. But it's been interesting because it's today child rights and you, and the you is the important thing. Even you can make a difference. I think that's the important thing, to understand the responsibility or the accountability that all of us have to humanity. So that's what the CRY story is. And along with CRY, there are several other social issues that I handle and deal with. So it's quite exciting.
I think it's very important to have that good natural balance of professional explorations as well as the social segments. And that is where I specifically really admire the way in which you've set up RGB. It was RGBX earlier, and now that composite has kind of, divided into multiple realms of its own. So could you shed some light on that?
So design was the core philosophy. So what we landed up doing, I mean, we started with odd jobs. I started working immediately professionally as soon as I got out of college. And we had friends who'd join and people who'd want to join, and we started doing all sorts of things. So from architecture, which was technically supposed to be our primary focus, we got into exhibition design, we got into stage and sets and lighting and dance and theater, and those kind of beautiful performing arts and performative sort of spaces. And then we got into doing industrial design, we got into communication, graphics, experience design. So one always wondered where architecture really fit in, and then we realized that we were doing a lot of our urban projects. In those days, I didn't even know that it was called urban design. And then we realized that we were doing a lot of planning stuff, which was exciting because we sort of lent ourselves and our skill sets to larger scale stuff. So before we knew what was happening, I think in those days there was no internet and there was no focus and knowledge, universal knowledge of what you were doing and who else was doing it.
Right.
And we realized that we were running a fabulous multidisciplinary practice. And because we were there were so many companies that were evolving within the company, we called it the RGBX group, so to speak. X was supposed to be temporary. It's
Not
been
like Elon Musk's ex.
it's been 45 years, and there's nothing more permanent than a temporary fix. So never use working titles because they stick. And gradually, I think in about 2007, there was no succession plan because my kids didn't want to get into architecture or design. They actually are into design, but they didn't want to get into running a practice. So we sort of split up into verticals that dealt specifically with communication and design. And Eden was basically educated environments, which dealt with sustainability. And we had RBSA, which was a group that did construction and production and management. And the way we had interior group, and we had an architectural group, and there was some great fun that was happening. So this is where we all sort of separated into verticals which were standalone companies. So here's where my associates who'd been colleagues who'd been working with me ever since 10, 15, 20 years, it was now their companies in which I had a part.
Oh, wow.
So that's the sort of way we broke it up. And a lot of those companies are doing extremely well, and a lot of those companies are sort of struggling, and some of the companies have closed down. But that's how life is. And I was stuck with a baby, which is architecture and urban design. So that's pretty much what I did. I continue to do.
So while you're nurturing this baby of yours, I think one of the few earlier projects that you got was to design the logo of Tata, and also that's that very unique visiting card of Ratan Tata.
Yeah. So the Tata corporate identity was designed by a UK based company called Wolf Ollins, and we were their local counterparts. And we had the privilege and the fortune of designing the 3D logo for Tata, which you see all over on all the trucks, buses, cars, vehicles, etc. And yeah, Ratan Tata had a problem because he said, on my little piece of real estate, which is that little space of a visiting card, I have too many Tatas appearing, in my name, in the company names, in my email address, in the building address, etc. So, how does one solve problems like that? And there were many small problems that we sort of continue to work with. But that's the exciting part of being a designer.
So how did you solve it?
Well, we gave him the option of two sides on the card, which he didn't want. We gave him the option of eliminating a lot of data from his card, which he loved because he didn't need it. As chairman of the company, you need it. So it was not a force fit that you had to have the company name and you had to have the address and you had to have the telephone number, etc. So it became a situation where he agreed to whatever had to be done. Yeah, go Minnow.
Marie Kondo his.
Absolutely.
Nice, nice.
So I think that was exciting because and then of course we went into the font size and we went into half point sizes because of readability and stuff like that. So and RNT being a designer himself was good fun to work with.
Yes, yes. So when it came, like you talked about problem solving, where the brief was set by the client in this case. But I'm sure that in projects which are large and small, one has to also derive and work on the impact of what that solution is going to have. Now, is that impact for you different for when the scale of the project changes? Like, is it quantitative more or qualitative more? How do you identify that? Which are the pieces which are critical and non-negotiables?
So I had the fortune of being in my very early 30s. I had the fortune of working on railway stations. Shirish Patel of Shirish Patel Associates approached me. He was my guide mentor during my thesis in my college, and we sort of knew each other, and we had a lovely rap. And he approached me saying, "Listen, we've got this opportunity for a railway station. So would you like to architect the space?" And we said, "Yeah, great." And we realized that working for government or working for public projects was a fabulous opportunity because the smallest things that you did actually made a huge difference. So we have 7.5 million people traveling on our railways, suburban stations, suburban trains every day. That's the population of some of our many European countries. And the smallest things that we did would impact this kind of huge population. So the smallest of impacts would create, or the smallest of design interventions would create a huge impact. Simple, stupid things like, clean sidewalks or small indicators that you were coming to the end of the line, or splaying or rounding of corners so you didn't break those tiles, or no offset so that people didn't see a space and spit into it, or just ganda karo, so things like that were great. And we realized that there were huge challenges because we had to change every time we wanted to do something new. It was like, boss, 1987 में ये हुआ था या 1957 में ये किया था. This was the law that we have to follow. And people didn't realize that population had changed, densities had changed, millions of people were added to the local suburban tra- travel space. So I think it was important that we challenged the space, we challenged the rules. We had lots of head fights in the sense of, trying to figure out where we were and what we were doing. And we kept getting quoted saying, if you don't believe us, go and see the other station. Yeah. And I'm saying, hello, the other was built in the maybe early 1900s. Yeah. Today we're talking about 2000s. And for the next 30, 40 years. So infrastructure needs some bold decisions. And we realized that if we had stuck to maybe a 3.5 meter lane for bridges, we wouldn't have been able to handle the traffic that a 7 meter bridge even has difficulty doing. So those are the kind of things that we
So there was a lot of foresight that had to come in, because it's public projects are not just for the present; they're actually for a density that you are anticipating in future.
Yep,
It's
projected.
very interesting because when you looked at most of the railway stations that you have in Mumbai, you say Tilak Nagar or you say Chembur or Mankud or even the ones on the Western Line and all of it. And then you compare them to all the ones that you see on the Trans Harbour Link on the Navi Mumbai side. Each one of them is celebrated and it has its own identity. And I'm sure that all of it really began with this problem solving approach. Ki, okay, one, let's make this into an office building. Other, let's make it into a parking space.
Uh, we had 50 lakhs from the railways as a budget to create a railway station.
This was in which year?
And this was in 1987-ish. That was the budget. There was never a private architecture or private design space consultancy that ever did it. So effectively what we said was, if we want to do some great stuff, if we want to change the ways of the land, we needed to have some more money. So we proposed the airspace, and we had a lovely guy in Sitco, Mr. R.K. Jha, at the time, who was beautifully futuristic. And he bought into this idea and he loved it, and he actually patronized the idea of airspace. So we created airspace because that was free, and we sold airspace. So effectively, you were able to get your money in and do whatever you had to do.
This is at the Kharghar railway station.
This was not at Kharghar. This was at Nerul, Sanpada, Juinagar, etc. Kharghar was interesting because we insisted to have a car parking on Kharghar railway station. Kharghar railway station is like a voice bubble in the cartoons, where you have this huge mass of Kharghar like a pear sitting, 4 kilometers away. And everybody had to drive to the station, or everybody had to come to the station to get on the train. So we decided to do a pay and ride sort of facility. And when we did that, that was fabulous because that was real value creation, not just value addition. So we created a car park which housed 750 cars. And I was told categorically that there are not even 700 cars in Kharghar. So what are you talking about? And I insisted that we should do a multi-level, as in 3, 4, 5 levels, because we could easily accommodate that in the foundations of this building. And I was told that that's not happening. But point make is that 750 cars would otherwise have had to park on the street, on the road, or in the compound, or the strip along the railway tracks. So we created and we generated 2 large plots of land, almost 5,000 square meters, which they were able to sell or commercialize, and we built on top. And the money that you get from the car parking rate every day, tariffs, pays for upkeep, construction, maintenance, etc. So that was an OPEX that we were able to handle, and that was a CAPEX that we were able to generate. So I think that was great in terms of what thinking can do. Yeah.
These are some of the things that not many viewers would know, but Marine Drive and associating it with Ratan Batliboi is something that everyone can talk about. But let's look at Marine Drive from all these scales of SML Excel. And now let's look at design thinking and tinkering that happened inside your studios when you were working on this.
Yeah, so I think Marine Drive was our most exciting project because we were dealing with a stakeholder who we did not know, and we were dealing with
You did not know
owners,
citizens of Mumbai.
the stakeholders I'm talking about. The stakeholders were, the MMRDA, who had floated the competition, and all sorts of, non-personal sort of authority that were involved in it. And the Marine Drive footpath technically had about 31 utilities under it, okay, which nobody knows, or even the people who knew didn't know. And having said this, this was quite scary, because every time you try and dig something and say, okay, we've got the MGL stuff happening, something else would pop up, and Satyam would have some cable under it, or the BEST would have something, or Tata Power would have something else, and there were water lines all over the place. And so it was very interesting to compile and do a sort of survey and study of what existed. But we looked at a sort of 10-90 rule. If it's good for 90% of the people who use it, we do it. If it's the 10% who want a doggy track or a jogging track or a skating track or a cycling track, we say no. We also had to have the flexibility where you could park 200 cars on it, or you could, put thousands of seats on it to watch a Republic Day parade, or you could park, 25, 30, 50 school buses when they were visiting Tarapurwala Aquarium, or those parks there. So it had to be a completely flexible relationship. And so we designed it holistically for 4.5 kilometers from Nariman Point all the way to Chowpatty. So that was the extra large. And then you had the large, which was, clusters. So we did a beautiful space, a sort of uh, amphitheater and public space at the Nariman Point end. And we did a beautiful space at Chowpatty for the Bhelpuri Walas, and another amphitheater there, and to watch the sun setting in the sea. And there were many other clusters like this which we had proposed along the way. So that was a large scale. It wasn't small at all. And then the medium scale was primarily looking at interventions like parking, or like bridges that we had to do, or pedestrian pathways, or under bridges, subways that we wanted to do, which happened. And then there was the small scale, which is really dealing with the seating and the details of the median and the details of the bus stops and the details of how we'd look at people watching the sea or people watching facing the footpath. And then build into stuff like, if they had a Republic Day parade, they'd have to cordon off the area. So they should not break the footpath, and bamboo, put the bamboos and temporary partitioning, or we had to dig holes for that. We did a sort of slow, medium, and fast pace for the walkers and the joggers and stuff like that. So there was a lot of beautiful thought processing that happened in that. We're going to document it at some point. It's been 10 years now. Marine Drive is completely, well, imitated wrongly and butchered badly by virtue of the coastal road. But having said that,
That is one way of genuine appreciation. No, when you
oh yeah,
imitate
when you
something, then
imitate,
it
yeah.
means that.
So I don't get upset when people copy. I mean, I love it when people say, we saw, sir, aapka idea liya hai. I said, lovely,
But sahi
but
se lo.
but a lot of guys in the office get a little offended, and but that's our intellectual property. And I said, what is intellectual property? You can't share it, for the better good, for the greater good. So I think Marine Drive was a lovely SML, XL, XXL maybe, because it's a potent project and it impacts the city. Every time, even when I drive there these days at 2 o'clock in the night, there's basti, there's action happening. It's the most thrilling feeling for me to go there on weekends and see, people from the innards of Bombay coming out and just refreshing themselves with just fresh air and, stuff like that. And of course, lots of conversations with the public and lots of conversations with the A road, B road, D road, G road, everybody who sort of thought they owned Marine Drive but wanted their own stuff done on it. And it took a while to, let people realize that we do it for the greater good, not for themselves.
Is this town hall function, like when you're doing a public project, how does participation work in it?
So we must have had at least 50 to 75 presentations
To the public.
to the stakeholders of Marine Drive, to the inner lanes, to the commercial hubs, to the Nariman Point Association, to the marine drive associations, to the Janta, to the municipal corporation, to the A Ward Bureau.
How long was this process?
How many years?
Ah.
Well, it took us, I think, 4 years by the time we hit the ground, and then it was about 6 years totally. Yeah. And it was exciting.
Was it your most democratic project, or were there others which was?
I think that Marine Drive was clearly a democratic process. But the interesting thing about Marine Drive and why it was successful is because you had aligned the public will, you had aligned the bureaucratic will and the political will. And it fell apart. I mean, we weren't able to finish the project the way we had envisioned it. It fell apart because the public started fighting about what they wanted and what they didn't want. And the bureaucracy said, listen, guys, make up your minds. Till then, we're not doing anything. And then the politics changed. So effectively, you had a fabulous opportunity which you let slide. So those are interesting learnings on this process.
I think when it comes to public projects, especially, it is the vision of the leaders that kind of sets the tone for what you wish to do at the space. Like you mentioned in the railway stations, the one Mr. Jha, who was open to Sitco, also looking at financial gains for the operations of the project, or even at Marine Drive, you said that things failed. So are there any other examples where there was some really visionary directions that made real good public projects or initiated good public projects for you?
A lot of the public projects, the way I know them, uh, happen by public initiation. And as an architectural and urban design practice, we had an urban design group of almost 15, 20 people. We created our own initiatives. And because we had the opportunity to do these large railway station projects, we sort of got onto the Delhi Metro. And because we did the Delhi Metro, we got onto the Bombay monorail. And we had lots of opportunities to work on these large scale public spaces. And then we sort of picked up on this and made proposals for the BEST and their lands in India, in Bombay, in suburban. Yeah, they were initiatives from the studio. And hopefully we're going to publish a book on those soon. We realized that we have almost 100 odd ideas which could change dramatically the space and how public would be impacted. Small interventions that would change the way people saw things and observed things, or even experienced their public spaces. But talking about visionary, if there's a leader at the top, or if there's a political situation which allows them extra votes, or more familiarity, or more popularity, then it became the thing to do. So projects like we've got for the August Kranti Maidan or the Azad Maidan, somebody has to pick it up. Yeah. And once some powerful political party owns it, then it becomes a sort of standard. And then if it works always and ticks in the boxes, then we go ahead.
So these are projects initiated in your studio and then presented to the.
We continue to initiate these. We call them RGBCPL initiatives, and we push. I know that we had a tunnel proposal instead of the coastal road, which I must have made at least 30 to 40 presentations. I know that we've made presentations for Bombay Central Station, where I've talked to at least 5 railway ministers and at least an equivalent amount, if not more, of railway board members, just to show how we can change and dramatically impact that location of Bombay Central and create 25 acres of green space on the ground and another 20 odd acres of green space in the sky. And it could all be funded pretty much by development and itself. So, but when authorities don't talk to each other, that becomes the problem. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, or doesn't want to know, and doesn't care, quite frankly. And it becomes a situation of either power politics, or not in my backyard, or both janjat wala kaam hai, my 3-year term will get finished. So why do I even initiate that? So those are scary ones. But the tunnel was a fabulous idea because it was thrown out because they said, very, very high end consultants who the government was talking to look after the interests of Bombay, said you can't have a tunnel because people wouldn't be able to breathe in it. Or how could you carve tunnels under the sea? And we tried to show them and prove to them that we've been doing it in Bombay itself. Forget about anywhere else in the world. And then suddenly you have the coastal road, which is actually doing tunnels and actually boring and actually going under the sea. It was scary because our tunnel proposal was a 9 meter long, 9 kilometer long tunnel, 9.2 exactly, which today you're doing 13.2 kilometers or 13.12, 13.8 kilometers, trying to figure out to go from place to place. Now, when you look at that in terms of 4 extra kilometers per passenger car, think of the fuel when you've got thousands of cars on an everyday basis. So stuff like that. I mean, it's a rough ride.
Life inside your studio seems to be very exciting because it's not just dictated by which projects come, but you also kind of put together your thought to for the betterment of the city. And then I also remember you talking about this just shutting your shop for 3 months, 3 whole months, and then figuring things out. And would you like to share that?
So in the early 90s, the kids would just keep coming back and saying, "Arey, heran ho gaya, I wanted to do this, but wasn't allowed, or this is not, I wanted to do that." So I said, "Chalo boss, let's shut down, not respect any clients, not look at any clients' work. We've got enough reserve to go for a couple months. Let's develop our own stuff." And what started off as a beautiful furniture making exercise didn't start for a couple of months because the kids just had no way of how to start. There was no restriction, there was no limitation. You could do what you like, where you like, how you like, when you like, with who you liked. And
The problem solving or the brief had
there
not
was
come.
no brief, so there was no problem. And if there was no problem, you couldn't solve it.
Where's the starting
Okay,
point?
so where's the starting point? So then finally we said, okay, chalo. We went to Chor Bazaar, we bought some junk, and we converted that very quickly. And we had an exhibition. A partner of mine, Anjali Jain, and myself sort of pulled this whole thing together. And at Bajaj Gallery in Bombay, we had an exhibition for a week. The week was extended for another week because people just loved it, and nothing was for sale.
Where is it now?
And people would say, I'd go to cocktail parties or whatever, and people would say, "Oh, I bought that piece," and I'd say, "Really?" Because nothing was for sale. And or we'd allow them to give us a price, and if the price was right, we'd do it. So this was purely a non-commercial design experiment, which took us almost a year to do rather than 3 months.
You shut shop for an entire year.
We shut
Wow.
shop for a couple of months, and then we sort of, once the thing happened and started swinging, we had a good time doing that. So it was called Alchemy, which is changing things into gold. And the show was called Both Feet on the Ground because end of the day you were designing furniture and it had to work. It couldn't not work. But there were 7-legged chairs and rock and roll showcases and you know strange stuff. It's good fun.
That is so exciting because I can't imagine, what must have gone through your head at the helm of affairs, someone who's the leader who has to manage both the finances as well as the mood and aspirations of the ones you're working with. And at the same time, think about the betterment of the community, the city. So all these extra projects that you've just taken on yourself. Is there something that you'd like to share with the young designers here? That how do you run your practice?
Uh, I think we were able to earn a bit in the good old days doing interiors and fancy stuff. But I think the more important thing was, what do you put at the center? What do you put as the purpose of the practice? And if I put design at the center of the practice, then everything else is secondary. If you put money at the center of the practice, then the way you run your practice, the way you understand or structure it is completely different. If you put, work in terms of a work ethic at the center of your practice, it's completely different. If you put people at the center of your practice, it's completely different. So it depends on your practice centricity you would create a brand new way of looking at the practice. Luckily for us, or well, not luckily for us, but we were able to make ends meet at the time because we had a multidisciplinary practice. So where we'd earn quickly in terms of exhibitions or design or corporate showcases or small advertising stints, we'd earn the cash flow would be in, which would support maybe our architectural gestation, which would be 6 months, 8 months, 2 years, 3 years, and our urban design, which went on for 15 years. So in that sense, I think the practice was sort of self-reliant and working on each other's expenses and sympathies and tolerances. But it was tough because progressively, the graphic designers said, why the hell should we be patronizing the architecture? Or the architects would say, listen, why are we getting paid 10,000 bucks when graphic designers are getting paid 40,000 bucks? Or something like that. So there were obviously internal issues and obviously external issues because people would view me as an architect. So they would try and make me earn fees at 2% and 3% and 5%, which is what architects do, as against exhibition designers or graphic designers or corporate designers or advertising agencies, which would be earning 15 and 20%. So those kind of perceptions in the public space and those kind of perceptions internally, we fractured the organization to now be completely reliant on their own specificity. So a graphic design team or a communications team earned in communication terms, and an urban design or an architectural team earned it like that, or a project management team earned like that. And people would come to us expecting that everything would be thrown in at the same fee as any other architectural studio. So that was a big difference which we had to cope with. But I don't think you should let the commercial drive the practice, because once you do that, you realize that you want to do very little and you want to do only what makes money and you want to do only the shortest way of making the most money. So I guess sometimes you get into a backseat scenario. Design takes a backseat. You chalta hai a solution and you run with it because you know it won't take more resources. So things like that need to be considered.
So while you took care of aspirations of your own people, you also ensured the social aspirations of the city would be managed as well. And that is, I think, the beauty of design also, that it kind of becomes.
Yeah, I mean, what did you become an architect for? I mean, you became an architect to serve. It's a service scenario. And who are you serving but humanity and the social larger good? That's the big difference between doing small projects for my private clients. If I did a bungalow for my private client, I mean, at best, there'd be 30 visitors in the year, 50 visitors in the year who'd say, wow, wow, fabulous. We have a great time, lots of champagne, lots of beer, lots of caviar, and lots of barbecues. But when you do the same thing for a railway station or a large public plaza, there's millions of people who are hugely impacted by that. It gives them something to look forward to, something to live for, something to come to, something to experience and push. And it creates a certain civic sense within them as well.
Have you noticed a change in behavior of people because of a design change or a thought that you instilled in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the classic that I quote, not my project, but the Calcutta Metro. When the metro came to Calcutta, one of the dirtiest cities at the time, that metro was spick and span and clean because public respected that, and the Calcutta residents sort of were very proud of that space and looked after it extremely well. you know so it's like it's the broken glass syndrome. The minute a glass pane breaks, you repair it. The minute there's something thrown on the ground, you pick it up and put it in the trash, because the next person will throw stuff on the ground saying there was something else already there, and before you know what happens, it becomes a garbage dump, or you would realize that everything has fallen through the cracks. So I think that's a very important thing The Calcutta Metro is a classic example. The way people look after Marine Drive, it's not littered. It's beautiful. Yeah, and it's
identity of the city.
it became a very proud. I mean, besides of course the number thousands and millions of selfies, Marine Drive, we had created a consortium to do the project. I had a company called Alia Group, who was my friend Sanjeev Malhotra, who was a graphic and branding design company. And we did that project together, thinking that it would become the icon of. It was already the icon of Mumbai, and how it could create its own brand and its own identity. And we had interventions to take people up to the Air India building to let people look at Marine Drive in a bird's eye view. We had talked to lighting designers and lighting manufacturers to do a whole subsea, sort of submarine lighting grid to add more jewelry to the Queen's necklace. And we had some fabulous ideas, which unfortunately didn't get done because that was all part of phase two.
Hmm.
So interesting.
Yeah. I can completely imagine the Queen's necklace being adorned additionally.
Yeah, by rubies and emeralds, and you have changing lights at the time. And in the early 2000s, that was a a spectacle in the sense of changing lights was not as common as you see it today. So we could change and do stuff.
There's some very interesting things that happen in your brain, no? When you get a project, you're like, कुछ तो एकदम अलग ही करना है.
Yeah, there's no shortage of ideas. We used to joke in our office that idea का 10 रुपया. अभी थोड़ा भाव बढ़ गया है, 13 रुपये होगा, लेकिन आइडिया का 10 रुपये, because you're supposed to have a million ideas and then you get $1 million, 10 million bucks. But if you say idea ka 10 rupiya, sir, how will we earn? Then that means you've got one idea and you're expecting to earn everything on that one idea, which cannot be. So I think those are we've in terms of the aspirations of my office. I think I would say that I may have let them down by virtue of the kind of money that they would have liked to earn. They weren't paid less than the marketplace, but it became a situation where we'd have to work really hard for our money. And but that didn't stop the team, that didn't stop the enthusiasm, or the excitement of you know and then the interesting thing is the accountability. Having a responsibility to society is fine, but being accountable to society, I think, is a very important thing that we must realize. And I think when you take ownership like that for the youngsters to realize that, if you screw up, hundreds and thousands of your users are going to have a little handicap in what could have been a spectacular property. Yeah, experience. So those are important things that one has to learn at least.
Since you spoke of young learners or young architects and designers, I was thinking that once, like many a times, a school is given as a common brief to kids, especially because they've already been through school, so it becomes easier for them to negotiate through the spaces, understand the brief requirements. But when that learning design came to you, you turn it on its head, and that is why we have the Museum of Solutions, which is a learning space as well as a museum. So would you like to, kind of share with us how these students in sitting in schools can actually question and change the norm and go beyond just that simple brief that comes to them?
So I think architecture schools, you're talking about architecture schools, I presume, design schools. I think it's very important for the kids to realize that they have to put in a huge amount of rigor to learn and experience what they need to do. It's not about a skill of being able to do drawings and things like that. Considering that you don't have to do much thinking for a school design because you've been there, the point is if you do it mechanically, it's a sad waste of an opportunity. If you could look at, for example, we did a school, we've just finished a interesting school where we had class windows at a height above 7 feet. Because the reason is that you don't have to be distracted, and you have so much more wall space that you can look at, and you're getting light which is beautifully diffused above, and there's no direct glare, etc., etc., etc. Now, if you could think about things like that, I think it makes huge sense. There's nothing that says that you have to have windows at a window sill height.
And this building is built?
This building is built, it works beautifully. People don't realize why they're so comfortable in it. But when we point it out to them, they say, hey, really, man, we didn't even notice. Yeah. And of course, we built it, so we have pitched roofs and we have some interesting ventilation issues, which are very exciting. And you can afford to put in a big fan, not just 20 fans in the room, but one large, 8-foot diameter fan, which very gently cools the entire space, if at all necessary.
Because the hot air is all rising up and moving out through.
Or just simple flues that take the hot air up. And so you have to work with the environment, you have to work with the laws of the land, so to speak, and then you suddenly become, her boss, this is sustainability. And I'm saying, hello, this is just plain good design. And I mean, what do you want in a classroom? Good acoustics. Most of the classrooms fail because of bad acoustics. You have front benchers who can listen directly to the teacher, and the people at the back just can't hear what's going on. Overcrowding, the aisles and the space for the students. I mean, these are all things that the kids can, by observation, solve. And there's nothing that says that, but I didn't have space, or I didn't have the idea, or I didn't have a door, or I didn't have the money. I mean, you have to create all those.
And if I really had to decipher from what you just said, I think for you every project begins with observation, where you observe, you identify what the problems are, and these are solutions to problem that you kind of work through your design.
Yeah, it's like kids today are given the airport design. They've never been on a flight, or they've never been on an airport. How do you do that? You can't pick it up off YouTube, and you can't pick it up off time saver standards, and you have to be immersed in that. You have to do a method acting sort of thing. I used to have kids in my office who used to come.
Role play.
Yeah, not role play as much as, never travel by train because it's too crowded. And I'm saying, hello, I travel by train because you need to be crushed to the bone, by 100 bodies, when you have a density of 16.8 persons per square meter traveling on our suburban trains. That's the peak. Okay. The minimum peak levels are what you can't handle or tolerate. So those are the things that you have to be aware of and get used to. So I think it's you have to be able to learn, and you have to be able to invest substantial amount of your time to learn. And then you have to be able to argue. You have to unlearn everything. You have to go in with an empty cup. You have to go in with an empty cup, otherwise you're just brimming over and flowing through. But that's not the point. The point is the study is critical. And if you feel you're not getting enough time for the study or the observation comes post study, to be able to ratify and validate what you've learned or seen. And the scary part is that, if you're doing design, do good design. And if you're copying, at least copy good design. We talked about that earlier. But what kids do is they copy the glamour. They copy out of context. They it's so easy to create today from the references you have, or AI generated stuff, that it can become a massive burden and hindrance to learning or good architecture. And contextually, we are very different. We are noisy, we are crowded, we are dust. Our densities are crazy. Our spaces are hugely below par. Our maintenance is crazy. But you can't make those excuses for bad design. You have to try and solve everything by virtue of the opportunity you have and the responsibility you have as a qualified, trained professional.
True. Which imitation can't do, because the coastal road is no match to the detailing that has happened at Marine Drive.
Yeah, I mean, the coastal road has copied the Marine Drive, but sadly mechanized the whole product. And we've lost some very important ergonomic details. We lost some very critical materiality in terms of the textures that we created for Marine Drive. We've lost some. Yeah. I mean, we've just lost a lot of the details, and I wish they'd at least copied it correctly. That's the scary part.
Which is where the glamour component of what you spoke about comes. That many a times it's only the visual culture. What is seen is being imitated. What is experienced, what is used is often
I
missing.
think that you could say that. Yes. Yeah.
You've not limited your design only to humans. You've also designed for animals. So how different is it? Like, could you tell us about the project and then?
We've done a couple of animal research properties, and it's very exciting designing for monkeys. Yeah, and you have to understand their psychology too. When you have one male with 9 females living in a den or a pen, and you put in maybe space for 2 males, you realize that you created war. Or you realize the feeding habits of these monkeys, or you realize how you have to look at the sanitation of monkey pens and stuff. So it's very exciting to design for monkeys. Uh, it's very exciting to see how importantly ergonomics change, because you have the humans servicing the monkeys, but you're not designing for them. You're designing actually for the animals. Uh, so sanitation, like I said, hygiene issues, especially when we're talking about medical animals and primates. We talk about pathogen free.
Correct.
And it takes generations to create a pathogen free sample size. We talk about free ranging monkeys versus bringing them in, versus caging them and being humane about the whole thing. So there's a lot of things. The play area that we have to create for them is very exciting. And it's much more challenging than creating a play for human kids, for example. And then we work for computers, and we create these huge data centers, and we create these huge spaces for hundreds and thousands of computers, which has 2 people servicing them. So how do you design for machines? How do you design for equipment, which is very different from designing for human beings? So it's beautiful, because once you've done it and you realize sort of the parameters, it's very easy to apply uh, the senses or the sensibilities.
These sensibilities that you talk about, or even earlier when someone said, oh, this is sustainable design, but you said, no, this is just good design. I think today, in today's time, we've kind of segregated design into inclusive design, into sustainable design, into gender design and things like that. But is that really how an approach to design should be? Like, how do we ensure that all these boxes are ticked, they're all checked at the same time without having to call them by these different parameters, but just have good design that is equal for everyone?
But you've answered the question. It's sad, because if I have to have a box, if the boxes are in my head, then the design that I'm generating is going to work. If the boxes are not in my head and I think I've got a shortcut, and I say, hey, this is it, this is the solution, then I have to tick, is this solution sustainable?
So the boxes have to be in your head.
Yeah, it has to be, because these are non-negotiable issues. Yeah. You cannot say, I've designed a great looking toy, but it doesn't work. Or you cannot say, I've designed a great looking product, but it's not sustainable and it heats up and I need much more energy than I should have. You can't say that it's great for men, but not for women,
Right.
or great for kids, but not for old people. It has to be inclusive. It has to be. These are the parameters that unfortunately are getting unfortunately styled and becoming specialty norms. And you have consultants for this. I mean, today, in the good old days, architects or architecture projects had 3 4 consultants, an MEP guy and a structure guy, and that's about it. Today, when we look at the management of our projects, we have a list of 30 40 consultants, all of them subject matter experts. So you have a guy who's an expert on escalators but not on lifts, or on staircases but not on escalators. or on fire but not on suppression, on stuff, and of course the usual.
These departments don't talk to each other.
And it's your job to talk to each other or to make them talk to each other. Yeah. And that's where you need, and we need to, in our education, understand the generality of the architect. Because today, a lot of the young architects say, that's not my job. We'll get a specialist for that. But unless you know what to ask the specialist, or unless you know how to challenge the specialist, the louder specialist will take over your project.
This was almost like my last question that I was coming to, that if you had one message that you wanted to pass to the fraternity of designers from all your experience, what would it be?
I think it's a question of listening. I think you need to be able to listen and understand what people are trying to say. And the learning will come not by booking it, as in reading about it. You have to experience it. I mean, I used to ride around on my bike all day, cycle, and then it became a moped, and then it became a motorcycle, and then it was a nice motorcycle. And it was great fun because, I still know the city of Bombay extremely well. Every gully and every the strangest of places, because it's important to understand the gut of the city, go to the essence of. If I just drove on Marine Drive or Oval Maidan, I think Bombay was beautiful. But when you do the back streets of, the city, and I'm talking South Bombay, I'm not even talking about going further north. So it's important to understand your context. It's important to understand and listen. When I say listen, I'm talking about holistically listen, just all senses. Yeah. You realize that you can't walk on a footpath because, or you can't smell, you're keeping your nose blocked because of the smells, or you're keeping your eyes closed, or you're blinding off because you don't want to see certain things in your life, stuff like that. So I think that's an important consideration. And the other thing is to just keep constantly thinking. I mean, you just need to keep constantly figuring out how.
Idea nikalte raho.
Yeah, how and what if, I mean, there's scenarios that you play in your mind all the time. And when we did Marine Drive, we had a what if section, which is what if the coastal road happens? What if there was a link to Nariman Point? What if Marine Drive became a completely residential road? What if Marine Drive became a pedestrian plaza? Because they were all realities. Yeah, it could have been. And we could have done it now with the coastal road and everything in place. So they're constantly, I mean, you keep establishing scenarios in your head. And today, you have design thinking and systems thinking and, lateral thinking and impact thinking and, all sorts of thinkings. But that's what you do. You're just labeling it differently and you're putting an expert on it to tell you what it's all about. But you should be able to do that yourself.
I think talking to you is something that one can do endlessly, and this 1 hour podcast for sure is not going to suffice for the wealth of information that you have from your experience, from your idea, from the goodness of your heart that you're doing all of this with. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very small hamper. I think because of the spacing, we'll just leave this one here. But this is from Hello December. It's a boho cheek maximalist kind of a set which will adorn your already beautiful house. And there are these two books, one of which I've co-authored with Dr. Smita Dalvi. It's on Panvel, the place where Pillai College is actually based out of. And the second one is on 75 eminent important buildings of architecture in India as a research from the utility perspective. You'll be very surprised to see what's inside.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.